So welcome, everybody. My name's Jason Gillum, and I would like to introduce, in case you have not met her yet, Jennifer Shannon. She is one of our senior consultants, and she does all kinds of really cool pen testing stuff. But today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. So it's that feeling that you get when you're on special. Well, I get it sometimes on stage, and I'm supposed to be the expert in front of a whole group of tech people and other technical nerds, and I'm thinking, maybe I'm not really an expert on this. Stop looking at me like I'm supposed to know more than you. That sort of problem. So I'll let Jennifer take it away. I'm sure this will be really, really interesting. So go ahead.
Here we go. Well, hello. I always forget now, by the way, that for PowerPoint, if you're not clicked exactly right, you can't switch slides. So,
yeah.
I'm just going to introduce myself real quick. And this is going to be a pretty quick introduction because I'm probably going to spend a lot of time talking about myself. So, like Jason said, I'm one of the senior security consultants. I started in cybersecurity as a SOC analyst at a managed SIEM. And I ended up in a position where I was doing threat intelligence and reverse engineering malware for a while before I moved over into pen testing full time. So I've got a pretty varied background. And that is important because this field is very varied. But some other fun facts about me, all around geek. I collect things, as anybody who's ever seen anything with me in it. There's usually a bunch of random stuff behind me. I do run the local lockpick group in Jacksonville, and also I'm a Costco member. And I've started including that one because one of my coworkers, Kathy, put that once, and I was like, oh, that is the best. But also, if I'm being completely honest, I felt like I really made it in life when I got a Costco membership, and that was earlier this year. So it's been maybe 6 months, and I'm like, yeah, I finally made it in my mid 30s. So, and I gotta praise that because I'm gonna brag about myself a little bit. I always really heavily skim over my background and achievements in this field because, in large part, it is very uncomfortable for me to brag about myself. And I think that's something that a lot of people kind of understand. That's why resume writing is so hard because it's that chance to brag about yourself, but it's really uncomfortable to brag about yourself sometimes. So some things that I can brag about. I'm an anti-siphon instructor. I wrote and am the lead instructor for our API pen testing class. I am an accomplished public speaker. I've spoken in a wide number of conferences. I get invited to speak and a lot of different groups and locations. So I guess people really like what I have to say sometimes. And every time someone's like, oh, yeah, can you come talk? I'm like, oh, wait, why me? Uh, I do run local groups. Like I said, I run the Jacksonville chapter of Tool, but I'm also one of the coordinators for B-Sides Jacksonville. Um, I'm a mentor. I've been part of mentorships where I've taken on mentors professionally to help guide them and help them build up their confidence. But at conferences, I've had people walk up to me and be like, "Oh my gosh, I've always wanted to meet you. I'm like a huge fan. You're like one of my superstars that I've always wanted to meet." And I'm like, "Can you please reconsider that? Like, why? What?" Um, but on top of all of that, I do cool hacks, and I have some of a selection of cool things that I feel like they're cool that I've done this year. I got domain admin from an API.
Very nice.
Yeah, that was crazy because Active Directory is not my strong suit. My background is in networking, but I really kind of specialize in the APIs and web apps. So getting domain admin has always been a struggle for me. But then I saw this and I was like, wait, I can do this with the API. That was pretty crazy to me. Then I also managed to become basically a full network admin through an API. And I got a buffer overflow on a web app. And that legitimately, I was able to exploit that to gain access as an administrator that I should not have. Um,
Very nice.
so lots of cool hacks, but I'll be honest.
And I will point this out, that like all of these things that you've mentioned here are not things that are easily done. Like, and part of that's like, you can't just point a scanner at it and it's, oh, it
Yeah.
just happens, right? It's not like that. This actually takes understanding and thinking through, the API or the web app or whatever you're attacking, and trying to understand its behavior and getting into that. And I think that I would like to point out that that's a really important distinction there, that this isn't just, oh yeah, Jennifer knows how to point and click on things. It's not that at all. No, you know how to tear things apart and understand how they work. And that's how you're able to get to these cool hacks. So,
Yes.
which is really awesome. I think it's a great achievement.
I often joke about how I'm really good at breaking things, not always for the benefit of the pen test. Sometimes I just break things, but now that I've made myself super uncomfortable, you're probably like, okay, why did you just spend, I don't even know how long, just bragging about yourself? Well, first of all, there is literally an XKCD comic for absolutely everything I have found. But, despite all of this, and despite the fact that I can easily say that I am actually accomplished in my field and I can do cool things, I do very frequently struggle from imposter syndrome. And I very frequently have to deal with these feelings of self doubt. And as I was kind of gearing up for this talk, really one of the things that inspired me to write this is when talking to my coworkers, and I really do work with some absolutely outstanding individuals. I have called Eric the Active Directory wizard because if I don't know how he does it, he is amazing with Active Directory, and he is the person that I go to and like, I think that I've done this correctly, but I have no idea what I'm doing. And he is always able to just very quickly figure out the best path to domain admin and then actually how to get there.
Yeah, he just waves his hand and casts a
Yeah.
magic spell and it happens. So wizard is appropriate.
Yes. And but in talking to all of my coworkers, I have heard many times and in many different ways some form of statement that lets me know that they also struggle with that in some way. Um, like I was just saying, I can do network pen testing no problem. And I find some cool stuff on network pen test, but Active Directory I struggle with. So I always have to go to like Eric for validation. But conversely, there have been multiple times where Eric has come to me for validation whenever it comes to APIs. And I've heard him say things like, "Oh, if you can't find it, then I feel like I've done a good job." And there's so many times that I feel that way whenever I'm working with a coworker. I'm like, "Oh, if they didn't find something, then okay, then it's okay that I also didn't find anything." And I realize that we all kind of talk about having imposter syndrome or make statements about it, but how do you actually address it? And first of all, for anybody who maybe is a little bit newer to understanding imposter syndrome, it's the psychological phenomenon where you tend to feel like you are a fraud, or all of the successes you have had are really more luck based than anything you've done skill wise. And when people ask me how I got into cybersecurity, this is a really good example of feeling like I don't deserve the success that I have. I tell people that I got into cybersecurity because I got really lucky. And it's not wrong. I happened to go on this huge rant about Stuxnet, and the right person overheard it and asked for my resume. But saying that I got lucky discounted all of the effort and research I put into learning how malware operated to be able to go on a rant about Stuxnet. It was my actual skills that got that person to ask for my resume. It wasn't just that I was lucky, but saying, "Oh no, I got really lucky." It discredits all of that effort that I put in. And so there are some pretty common symptoms for imposter syndrome. And there's the fear of failure, perfectionism, and then discounting those achievements. And you guys probably heard me say some of that in my little brag sheet of like, oh, please reconsider me being somebody you look up to. I don't understand. I was interviewed by the news and they credited me as a cybersecurity expert. And I'm like, ooh, no, that is uncomfortable. I do very regularly. I find myself discounting some of those achievements or some of those things that I should be proud of. And I've had to spend a lot of time kind of reframing how I think about things so that it, at the very least, doesn't hold me back from achieving more. Because if you let it, imposter syndrome absolutely will keep you from being able to achieve more than what you think you are able to. Um, Another thing that I've noticed though is that this seems to be a very real problem in cybersecurity. Uh, Obviously, imposter syndrome is going to exist in just about every field or just even in hobbies. But I've noticed in cybersecurity, there are very few people that I've met that have not struggled with this in some way or another. And I think there's a few different reasons for it. One, stress. Let's be honest, this field is actually very stressful. And it doesn't matter if you're on the offensive side like I am or the defensive side. I mean, there were a lot of nights whenever I was in the malware research field where I would stay awake at night wondering if I made the right decision or what if I missed something in this binary that was actually malicious or maybe I wasn't able to catalog all of the indicators of compromise and that's not going to help the client. And so I would be stressed about those things that I could have missed. And while I have less of those sleepless nights now that I'm just purely on the offensive side of things, I still have those moments of what if I miss something on a pen test? Or what if I should, maybe if I had done it this way, it would have, that exploit would have worked. And I'll find myself questioning those despite the sheer amount of effort that I've put into
Mhm.
carrying out those jobs. Um, and I have here that how do we even become an expert? In a lot of ways, I have found that the path to becoming recognized as an expert in this field, it's not concrete. There's some people that were, they got arrested back in the 80s for being a hacker and now they are an industry expert. And then there's some people that just kind of sprung up and like, oh no, I created this tool and now they're an industry expert. And then there's people like me. I didn't get arrested in the 80s and I haven't created any super crazy fantastic tools, but I have dedicated a lot of time to learning um, the areas that I'm good at. And yes, I'm an expert, but what is the actual path to being recognized as that? When do you know you've made it? And it's so completely different for everyone that whenever you look at how somebody else got to where they are, you feel like you did it wrong.
Yeah, I can
This
see that.
is
It's like everybody has their own
yeah.
path to get there. Yeah.
Yes. And I think, in a lot of other fields, it's like, oh, becoming like an expert in like math or something. Oh my gosh, I might offend any of the math people because I'm not a math person. I
I
mean, I
would have
am, but
imposter syndrome there for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I know.
But I feel like they might have a little bit more of a clear cut path to becoming like those industry recognized experts.
I
Um,
I think one of the things that you have it on here. I think one of the main things that really pushes this as an issue in our industry is the rapidly evolving field. Things are always
yes.
changing, and because of that, we all we all experience this. I know that you'll agree with me on this, that as you learn more, you start realizing that you actually know even a smaller portion of what's actually out there. And so you feel like even
Exactly.
more and more of an imposter the more you get into the field. It's like,
That
oh,
is so
I
funny
don't.
because that's actually one of the notes I had. Because it's when you start developing like this sufficient knowledge, you really start to understand how much you don't know. And I compare myself to the how much I don't know. It's like an iceberg. And there's so
It's like
much.
an iceberg that keeps getting bigger.
Yes, and it's not even just that this field is rapidly evolving.
Yeah.
There's so many different areas to it. Like we're talking like that there's the compliance and auditing and regulations, and then there's defensive or architecture or like I came from a background for malware research. And yes, parts of that carried over into pen testing web apps and APIs very well, but they're still very different at their core. Um, and I think that there's also this pressure we put on ourselves where to be an expert, you feel like you have to be good at most of the domains in cybersecurity. And that's not realistic. Nobody is able to do that. And I mean, when you look at it that way, I mean, technically we're all imposters just because there's no way we can be an expert in every single facet of this field. It's
Yeah.
it's not realistic. Um,
It's not enough time in the day.
yes. And another thing that kind of relates to this, and I have this here. This is cognitive distortions, and I actually wanted to bring this up because this is a cognitive behavioral therapy term, and it's the term used for those irrational and negative thoughts that affect how we perceive the world around us. And when you have those repeatedly negative thoughts, you are more likely to perceive yourself and the surrounding world in a negative pattern. And so, cognitive behavior therapy focuses very heavily on reframing how you think. And I realized that this would fit in very well as I was writing this because a lot of what I'm talking about today is reframing how you think. Um, so I've listed a couple of the cognitive distortions here, which is, there's the polarized thinking, and that's when we're looking at things that are only in like black and white. If it's only in absolutes. So if I'm not good at this, I have to be bad at this.
Mm.
And then there's the overgeneralization of we're going to make these conclusions based on single incidents. So I made a mistake once 5 years ago, and that mistake is going to haunt me for the rest of my days. And it will always be evidence that I'm not good at what I
And so
do.
you're terrible at that thing now because
Yes,
of the one mistake, right?
exactly. Um, then there's the labeling, which is the labeling yourself negatively. And I actually have an interesting story about this. So, one, I learned something years ago when I was still in college, and it was that men and women fundamentally have different forms of humor, where men tend to be more depreciating towards the people around them, women tend to be more self depreciating. An interesting thing I've noticed in this field is that in cybersecurity, almost everybody is self depreciating with their humor, which I thought was really interesting because whenever I was just more in general IT, it was definitely more of that gender divide. But then I've noticed in cybersecurity, it's like we all are really hard on ourselves for no reason. Um, but when I first started as a malware researcher, one of the executives, and I cannot remember exactly what their position was, but they asked how I was doing. And I made the joke of, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just making it up as I go along. And that was a joke. He did not perceive that as a joke, and
Oh
he
no.
went and, like, started, like, a whole, like, "Does she actually know what she's doing?" investigation, and that put me in a really awkward position, so I've learned from that I kinda need to keep in context of who I'm about to make this joke to, and if they will understand if it's a joke or not, but that labeling yourself negatively does not only affect how you view yourself, but will also affect how other people see you. And I have had to develop some of these. I need to be aware of how I'm about to say something because I don't want other people to get that negative impression of me, even though I'm literally just talking about how I feel super insecure all the time. But and then there's also discounting the positive. Again, when I was bragging about myself earlier, I discounted some of those things that I did because it feels uncomfortable for me to celebrate those things or to be proud of those things. And reducing these positive events to, either being not that important or being just luck based, it does impact not only how we feel about our achievements, but how other people will feel about our achievements. And there's a couple of other ones that I do want to talk about that they get their own dedicated slide because some of these really heavily impact me, and these are the ones that I had the hardest time coming up with like defense strategies for. And I've called this one the chicken or the egg. And there's a lot of different ways that this can be applied. The example I have here is, did the exploit I try when I tried it, did it fail because this application I'm testing is secure and handled it appropriately, or did it fail because I actually have no idea what I'm doing? But there's other ways of looking at this. Is like, did I get to where I am because I'm lucky, or did I get to where I am because of my hard work? And if we're looking at this, like, which of these is actually the cause for what's happening? Sometimes we won't always be able to tell. Sometimes I literally just tested an app this week. I have no idea if it was insecure or meant to work that way, because it functioned in some weird ways. And I have to accept that I will not always know the answer to some of those questions. And those are times that I need to reach out and have additional discussions around it, because I legitimately did not know if I was supposed to be able to see some of the stuff I ended up seeing.
Oh yeah.
Um, and realistically, for those organizations, their teams are always going to know more about their products than I could ever hope to know as an external attacker who has somewhere between 2 to 14 business days to interact with that app. Um, but then there's also this filtering, and I think a lot of us have kind of heard the we're much more likely to focus on our negatives. And so, like, if I look in a mirror, all I can see is, like, the bags under my eyes, or like whatever. Other people don't immediately notice those. But we have a tendency to highlight our own negative attributes more than our positive attributes. Um, and I'm going to give an example. I have been jokingly saying, I gave a talk at Security Congress earlier this year, and I have said many times very publicly, this is the worst talk I have ever given. There was a lot of reasons for this. One, I had never been jet lagged before in my entire life, but I was jet lagged for this. I came in like the morning before, and I slept for like 18 hours and woke up and presented first thing in the morning. Uh, I had some technical issues where the talk I was giving normally has either a video demonstration or a live demonstration, and I was not able to do either one of them. So this thing that hinged on me being able to demonstrate some of the exploits with 10 slides to support it now became an hour talk of me fluffing those 10 slides,
Mm-hmm.
because I could no longer use those videos or the live demonstration. And then there was an actual medication change, which probably contributed to the jet lag a little bit. Um, it was a mess. I noticed during it that I used a lot of those filler. I noticed I was doing that a lot more than I do normally. And let's be
Yeah.
honest, I do them quite a bit normally. Um, my mouth very often has a hard time keeping up with my brain. So those filler spaces or phrases kind of keep me from losing track entirely. But that one, it was a train wreck from beginning to end, from my perspective. I got an email last night, and it said that ISC2 will be releasing a Best of Security Congress online product that will feature selected recorded content from our event. This is to inform you that your session is one of the recordings that has been selected to be included in this package due to its strong reception and attendance. I was surprised because, again, remember, I've been joking about how this is the worst talk I've ever given.
Yeah.
And they just told me it was one of the best ones they had this year.
Wow. Maybe they have low
Because
standards, I guess.
I don't know.
I mean, that'd be one
I've
way
been
to
joking
interpret
about that.
that.
But
But
remember,
no, really, honestly though, I'm not
yeah.
surprised. I did not see the talk, but I am not surprised that it got selected.
Imagine the API Apocalypse talk with no demonstrations.
Okay.
So it was just me talking about the API top 10 with no pictures or anything.
Uh,
Um,
but you're familiar with the topic. You can
yeah.
follow that. Yeah.
So it's so easy for me to focus on I know that I did not do as good as I would. And that specific example for that type of presentation, I've done before very successfully in other places. And so all I could focus on was what had gone wrong. And I wasn't able to focus on that I still was able to deliver information that was relevant and informative to the audience, and that it was entertaining to them in some manner or another. And so I'd kind of filtered out all of the potential positives for it by focusing only on those negatives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this comes down to thought patterns, and not just how we think about ourselves, but how we think about our work, and then also the other people around us. And I think that we've all kind of heard like the quotes that are like, the positive thoughts become positive results, or to change the world, change yourself first. But it's really not that easy. It takes a lot of work sometimes. So disclaimer, I'm not a therapist. Yes, I talked a little bit about the cognitive behavior therapy. Like I said, the whole idea behind this is identifying and challenging those negative thoughts. Um, and then figuring out strategies for dealing with those negative thoughts when you do have them. Hilariously, I have had, I have gone through several rounds of cognitive in the past, and it actually did not work for me. That was something that I struggled with a lot because I had a really hard time dealing with those negative thoughts. And I ended up seeking out something called EMDR, which is the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which instead focused on understanding those triggers and then confronting the triggers and then reassociating this um, the things that trigger you, or like the emotions or actions you're taking, reassociating them with a more positive um, experience. And so that was the thing that really finally helped me break out of the that negative thought cycle. And some people will be able to look at this and immediately start applying some of these practices or some of these strategies for helping to deal with those negative thoughts. But some other people are going to have to work a lot harder at it. That's okay. It's the growth doesn't come immediately. Once you start trying to implement these changes, it takes time to get there. So we're going to look at some ways that we can start shifting our mindset from that more negative self-perception to a more positive self-perception. One of the things that I have very frequently said is there is difference between how we present ourselves for growth opportunities or presenting ourselves as being inadequate. And when we view ourselves as being inadequate, this is really rooted in that self doubt. We don't feel like we are actually good enough to make a statement. I have been asked many questions I do not actually know the answer to. Um, there is nothing wrong with saying, "Hey, I don't know the answer to that, but I can look into it and get back to you." Or there've been many times where I've been on client meetings and I've said, "I don't know the answer to that, or and I'm not familiar with that specific product, but I do know people who are. Let me go talk to them, and I can either set up a meeting with them, or if they have an answer, I can get that back to you as soon as possible." That one is already presenting myself as being able to grow and learn versus the "I don't know," and just throwing my hands up at the problem. Like I said earlier, we're looking at these growth opportunities, and growth is not always going to be comfortable. Sometimes it is extremely uncomfortable. You're probably going to have to put yourselves into, well, quite firmly outside of your comfort zone for some parts of this. It's okay that it's uncomfortable, and it's okay if you struggle with it in the beginning. But one of the things that really attracted me to this field was that ability to constantly be growing and adapting. I found in previous roles or in previous fields, I struggled a lot once I felt like I hit that stagnation or where the job became too boring. And I'm like, there's really no growth for me here. There's nothing that's mentally challenging to me. And it's funny because the thing that attracted me to this field, that ability to be mentally challenged by the ever changing field I'm in, is also the thing that is responsible for imposter syndrome for many people. And I know quite a few people probably think that if I'm not immediately good at something, I have to be terrible at it,
Yeah, of
which
course.
is I'll I'll explain. Like one of my hobbies is I like to do leather work, and I picked it up and it just made sense to me, and I started making really cool stuff. But when I picked up embroidery, I was not immediately good at it. And I was like, "Ooh, I suck at this. I should drop this entirely." But I ended up sticking with it and I got pretty good at it. And I'm glad that I stuck with it because I enjoy it a lot. But it's kind of hard to, if I'm not immediately good at this, it's not worth doing. because there's so many areas in this field. I had no idea how APIs really worked when I first when I first started interacting with APIs. It took me a couple of years before I felt like I developed a good knowledge and like that foundational understanding of it to even start pen testing it effectively.
Yeah.
I but putting in all that time and effort, I think a lot because now, uh, believe it or not, I'm really good at pen testing APIs. It's like one of the few areas I'll brag about myself as. Like, I'm good at APIs. Um, it's important not to throw your hands up when you hit those walls. Um, I have this slide here because there's this comparison is the thief of joy, and I believe this is credited to Theodore Roosevelt. I could not tell you if he actually says this or not. I'm going to assume he does because I've seen it credited to him in multiple places. Uh, Realistically, it's so easy to look at other people in this field and feel so discouraged because, like, I made a joke recently. I was speaking about physical security at a B-Sides that Jason Street was keynoting for. And if you
Mhm.
don't know who that is, he's very well known in this industry for physical security and social engineering. And in my head, I'm like, how am I meant to follow up on that? And I was comparing myself to him, even though it was irrelevant at the end of the day. What he ended up talking about was not anything close to what I was talking about. But I was so mentally prepared for it that I was comparing us before it even came to be. And yes, I still sometimes compare myself to other people.
Yeah.
I have had to learn how to stop doing that. I avoided public speaking in general for a very long time because it felt like I did not have anything new or interesting or relevant to add. Because I saw all of these other people doing talks and they just spoke so much better than me and they didn't ever get distracted midway through a sentence. And I don't know, it's once I stopped comparing myself to other people all of the time, I realized that I was actually able to provide some form of insight. And it's maybe not entirely different than what they were trying to say, but maybe it would have been in a way that was easier for the audience to understand, or at least some of the people to understand, because we all learn things differently.
Mhm.
So, how I learned it will not be the way that somebody else learned it. That's completely fine. But by putting myself out there, one, it has forced me to answer questions I had no idea were even going to be questions. People will ask me some of the most off the wall things during any of these talks. And it's not even like, oh, that's a bad question. That's a really good question. I just never thought about it in this context before. I'm going to have to go do research into it. But also in the process of writing these talks and these classes, I have dedicated a lot of time to really understanding what I'm talking about. And that has actually helped me significantly. It was when I started talking about pen testing APIs, or it's when I started talking about the research that I did into exploit kits, that was when I really started to feel like I understood what I was doing and what I was talking about. Um, but again, this industry saturated with experts. They're all over the place. This is one of the few fields I think that, like, if you have a question about a specific protocol or a framework and you're like, I don't understand how this works, you can go easily find the person who made it and email them and get an answer directly
Yep.
from. And so it's like, how am I meant to compete with that? And I don't have to compete with that.
No. It's good to recognize that, though.
Yes.
And I think that's critical to getting past issues or like imposter syndrome type of thought, right?
Yes. I don't have to be better than anybody else in this field because realistically, there's always going to be people that are better at what I do than I am. That's fine. Um,
But that doesn't change the fact that you're better than a lot of other people in the field at what you do.
yes,
So
that is absolutely
everybody
correct.
needs to we all need to learn from each other, basically.
Yes. And, a lot of the people that take my classes, one of the things that I very frequently say is like, if somebody comes out of this class and is better at what I do than I do, that is a win for me. Because, yes, sure, I gave I gave the stepping stones for somebody to just be way better at what I do than I do. But that still means that I helped in some way improve this field as a whole. And that is an achievement that is worth celebrating. And I don't have to be better than anybody else. I just have to be better than I was before. And it's,
Mhm.
I think that we jokingly say like, oh, I just have to be better than I was yesterday. But let's be honest, there's going to be times where we won't be able to make that growth because of life decisions. Um, but as long as you're still striving to that growth, when you look back at what you knew 10 years ago, it's going to probably blow your mind how much knowledge you have gained. Because I remember, I have been interacting with some of the local universities lately, and I'm looking at their curriculum, and they're like, "Yeah, no, I'm confused about this or the SSH or like how is this host name set?" And I'm looking at it, I'm like, "What do you mean? That's so basic." But then I remember when I was in college, I struggled with those same things
Of course, yeah.
same way. And so that was one of those eye openers to me that I have actually grown significantly in this field and I have actually amassed quite a bit of knowledge. Um, but we all have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, you build on top of a foundation, then you build on top of that, and then you build on top of that, and then you forget that at one point there was those foundation steps, and everybody has to start with those.
Yep.
And yeah,
You have to learn how to walk before you can run, right?
exactly.
Um, Another thing that helped me tremendously was learning that I wasn't the only one that felt this way. Um, Many moons ago, when I first started as a SOC analyst, every Friday I would go home and I would feel like, okay, I have an understanding of what I'm doing. Keep in mind, I was a network, like for a network, right? Like entirely dealing with network logs. My degree was in networking. I had at least a basic understanding of this and how they should be secured and what might be considered suspicious. And so on Fridays, I would go home and I would feel like, yeah, I've got this. I could do this. And on Monday, I would go in and I would be so stressed because I don't actually have this. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. I don't know what this alert means or what that protocol is or why is that port being used for this. And I was so stressed about it. Um, and I was so heavily discouraged in my first few months in cybersecurity. And then one of my coworkers, one night just made a passing comment to me of how when he first started there, he almost quit because he'd never felt like such an idiot in his entire life, and that he had worked in IT and in like adjacent fields for 15 years before he made the jump into security. And the fact that he felt like such an idiot and like he had no idea what he was doing when he first started was extremely reassuring to me. And that was from that, I started to make sure to let other new people know that I really struggled in the beginning. I did not always know what I was doing. There was a lot of nights of me Googling things or reading books and trying to figure out why things were the way they were because I didn't just immediately know it. Um, I found that one, being able to talk to other people about it has helped drastically in at least identifying no, it's okay to struggle. You will get better. It just takes time. Um, I have specifically signed up for mentorships so that I could interface with people who were at the beginning of their security journey and let them know, yes, that is absolutely something that I struggled with in the beginning. And learning how to write business emails is a beast in and of itself. So, yes, I would always overthink how I was emailing clients because I don't know, what if I accidentally offended them? Um, I've also found that joining some like community groups or being a part of anything that puts me in contact with other people in my field, and it doesn't have to be like my direct coworker who sits next to me, but being in groups of other people who would be considered my peers, talking to them about it lets me know, again, I'm not alone, that we all have similar struggles. It might not be the same technology and it might not be the same issues, but we do struggle sometimes.
I would add on that, like my overall experience with the InfoSec communities, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, is they are very encouraging.
Yes.
Like if you just get in there and start talking to people, they're like, "Oh yeah, you should get up on stage. Oh yeah," you should. And that's kind of part of how I
Yes.
started doing some speaking as well was like that. So,
And
by the way, on this picture that you have up here, I really like the shirt that you're wearing. I think it's awesome.
thank you. It's a for those of you who don't know, Jason is wearing the same shirt. It's the Secure Ideas Hawaiian T-shirt we did for a charity a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I was surprised when I came across this picture. I completely forgot we took it. It was after GurCon. Um, and this is actually a really good like segue into a story about some growth I've had actually. So this was after GurCon, and one, I was initially attracted to this from across the street because I was like, "Oh, what a weird looking thing on the side of the building." And then I got over to it, and it was like, "There's no shame in asking for help, and it's I want you to talk about your feelings." And I was like, "You know what? This actually does very heavily relate to what I'm trying to talk about, and that I became very transparent in the mental struggles I have had in this field because I want other people to, at the very least, say, you know what? If she had those struggles and she made it to where she is, then I can too. Um, but I actually spoke at GurCon because I did a talk called Oil Circuits and Cheese, which was about the Swiss cheese model of error. And I'm not going to go too crazy deep into it, but I can pinpoint the exact moment in my career that led to me giving that talk eventually. And it's back when I was still in the SOC and I made a massive mistake. Um, we would get alerts for an administrator log on for this one specific company, and it was 20 30 times a day because most of their administrators were remote, so it was not uncommon to see like an administrator log on from India or an administrator log on from Switzerland or an administrator like I we and for this specific client it was just fill out the administrator and then where they signed in from and send us the email so that way we at least have the log and we can track if any abnormalities happen.
Mm-hmm.
There was an alert one day that was an administrator login from China. This was not one of the company or countries that we had ever seen a login for this company from before. And if one of their administrators was traveling to a different country, they would send us an email so we would know. And we did not have an email correlating this. But I had been so in that the process of copy paste send, just carrying out the steps mindlessly that I sent it as just a regular email and I did not escalate it. And it turned out that they were compromised and this attacker dropped ransomware.
Oh no.
Yes, it was um but one of our saving graces there was that I did email it. I just did not treat it appropriately. And that was a huge mistake for me. Um and following that, I had to very heavily look at what it was that led to that happening. And it was understanding that I was stuck in this routine of do this, send, do that, send, that I never stopped to think critically about some of the things that I was doing. And that is what led to that error happening, which led me down this research rabbit hole of understanding how catastrophes or errors occur in organizations, which led me to the Swiss cheese model of error, which was identifying those mental biases and those areas where you are likely to make a mistake because you're just going with the flow, or this is the way we've always done it, or things like that. I never would have gotten to a point where I have been invited to speak at places to give similar talks to the oil circuits and cheese because it was a very popular talk, but I would not have made it there had I not made that mistake 9 years ago. Because instead of, letting that hold me back and letting that mistake define me in a negative way, I use that as a chance for growth. It helped me identify ways to avoid it in the future, and then also how to help other people avoid making similar mistakes.
That's good.
Some other another thing that I've started doing this more recently. This was not something that I would do before, but the celebrating your successes. Um, track your wins. And it's, I have the journal here. I'm a journal person. I have a physical journal. And it's, I have to be very careful about what I write in it because of NDAs, but it's like, oh, I got a buffer overflow today, or, oh, a SQL injection occurred today. But I'm excited that I did that cool thing. So
Yeah.
I'll just make a quick note of it on my calendar or something. Or I'm a huge fan of checklist. Whenever I'm doing anything, like, oh yes, I have accomplished all of my tasks for this week. And it feels so good to mark off all of the things on your checklist. That, not that I ever get to do that very frequently, but when you do get to do it, it is an amazing feeling. These blogs, I'll be completely honest, I'm actually really bad at writing blogs. But if you've done a cool thing and you want to talk about it, or you want to show other people,
Yeah.
a blog is a great way to do it. One of the things that I do personally is that once I have found something cool, um, I'll go find some of the newer people at Secure Ideas who maybe haven't had a chance to encounter this technology or this specific exploit, and I'll show them how I did it. And this does two things. One, it lets me feel like I'm awesome and I'm just amazing knowledge. But also it helps them build up that knowledge that they probably would not have had a chance to gain otherwise. And so I'm helping increase their skill set. Well, also maybe I'm humble bragging a little bit. Um, it's okay to brag. When I got that API, when I was able to utilize an API to get domain admin, and this only happened because they had horrifically misconfigured everything, by the way. A machine was a domain admin. And I could get remote code execution on that machine through the API. I messaged Eric and I was like, hey, guess what? I got domain admin because I don't get domain admin like Eric does. So I was like, Eric, I did a cool thing. So it's okay to brag. It's okay to say I did a cool thing. It's just, don't rub it in. Don't be a jerk about it. There is absolutely nothing wrong with being excited about something you did awesome, though.
Absolutely.
Set realistic goals. This was another thing that I actually struggled with a lot at the setting the realistic goals. It's small steps will eventually become big steps. It's not right away, but taking small steps of just learning how the difference between submitting a post request and a GET request, and then the different ways that APIs can be formatted or different network diagrams. Learning those things still will eventually lead you somewhere. It's also important to be adaptable, though. It's really easy for me to be like, yeah, no, do this, do that. I have personally here, I've been trying to write a book and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm totally going to write one chapter a year or a month. And then I started writing it and realized that that was not realistic for me at all. I could maybe do one section of a chapter a month. And so I kind of had to adapt it a little bit to fit what was more realistic, especially because some of those chapters were going to require a lot more effort for me to actually understand and digest this information so that I can share it in a way that would make sense for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to adjust that. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm still making progress on it. Even if like the only thing I've done is made an outline and gave it a title and started, I have like maybe a quarter of a chapter done. I have made progress that I had not made last year. That's still, again, that's worth celebrating. That's worth pointing out. I have actively been pursuing some of my goals. And yes, it's taking me a little bit longer, but I will get there eventually.
It's good. It's good to have goals like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. And it's also good to be realistic. Like, yeah, sure, I can say I'm going to be an expert in SOAP APIs. You know what? I'm really good at SOAP APIs, but they are intense.
I don't think anybody really wants to be an expert
No.
in SOAP APIs.
Yeah, no, SOAP, for those of you who don't know, it's very strongly typed. And so if you don't have like an example of like a request or basically what would be the schema for formatting a request for a SOAP API, you're not going to be able to do it. It's very, very particular with how you can interact with it. And the first hurdle to pen testing SOAP APIs is figuring out how to interact with SOAP APIs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a hint here is it's all XML based.
Yes.
So that automatically makes it even worse.
Yes, because let's be honest, XML is not the easiest thing to read. we reframe your mistakes. Like I shared earlier, I have legitimately made some pretty big mistakes. I've heard stories from some of my colleagues where they have sent documents to the wrong clients before. Whenever you make a mistake like that, it is always worth taking a step back, trying to figure out what led to you making that mistake, and then maybe identifying ways to prevent it from happening in the future. And sometimes the growth that can result from that is going to be more surprising than you might expect it to be. I did not expect when I got pulled in into a meeting and basically read the riot act for completely messing that up. I did not expect that to eventually become one of the cornerstones for my career. Um, but it did. And so, yes, it's embarrassing. I made a huge mistake, but I also want to be transparent about it because we are all going to make mistakes. It's okay. It's really easy to end up in like this spiral of negative thoughts over and over again, especially when you make a mistake like that. And if you let that spiral continue, you won't be able to break out of it. You're not going to be able to avoid making those mistakes again in the future, and you're not going to be able to grow from it. So, reframing, oh my gosh, I messed everything up, into how can I do better, turns it from I screwed everything up to this is how I can improve.
Good
And
advice.
then what was that?
I said that's good advice.
And then finally, I have taking a break. And I think this is another reason why imposter syndrome is actually such a big deal in this field, is that something else I've noticed, that this field is very prone to burnout. And that is, again, in large part due to the fast paced nature and scope of this field in general. It's so easy to burn yourself out accidentally. Um, like I said earlier, I love what I do. It's a lot of fun. And so I'll spend time like reading books and like doing labs for fun. But at the end of the day, that's still work related. Um, and so you can burn yourself out without realizing it. And so another thing that can kind of help is taking a step back. It's important to take a break. I have this fun quote from Twin Peaks here just because I love Twin Peaks. It's one of my favorite shows. And so I'll probably find an example or a reason to talk about it any chance I get. But the idea here is, even if it's something small, do something to reward yourself. And in here he's like, yes, I'm gonna have 2 cups of coffee today instead of one. It's not a big reward, but it's something small. He gets to take that like short break to drink a cup of coffee in the middle of a complicated investigation. um, so, sometimes take a nap, go for a walk. There have been times I've been so stressed at work. I'm like, I have to go for a walk right now. I need to not look at my computer screen for a little bit. I know our CEO Kevin, he's got hobbies that include woodworking and things like that because he specifically wanted hobbies that would not be computer related in some way or another. He needed something to completely remove himself from this
We
field.
spend so much time at
Yeah.
our computers, at our desks.
Yeah, because one of my big hobbies is gaming, but it's like, there's sometimes that I realize, oh, I'm gonna like relax and play like Power Wash Simulator, and then I realize I sat at my desk for 12 hours. I don't feel good.
Now you're gonna pressure wash at your desk.
Yeah. So, it's important though to do things, and I'm not always good at self-care. I used to be really good at, like, after I would go through a string of conferences, I would do something like go get a pedicure, go get a massage, because it's really stressful dealing with people, especially when, I mean, most of us are introverts naturally.
Yeah.
I haven't been as good about that lately, but it's, especially when I was kind of formulating this talk, I understood that that's something that I should at least start getting back into the habit for. And yeah, maybe I don't need to go do a full massage, but doing a face mask is fine. Something that just lets me remove myself from this field for a little bit and relax and not think about work significantly improves how I not only view my quality of work, but view myself. And so our doorbell just rang at the office. Interesting. I don't know if anybody else could hear that. But that's the gist of it. And if anybody has any of their tips on how they deal with the negative thoughts and imposter syndrome, I'm always open to it. And if you guys have any questions, like I said earlier, if you just need like a no, you just need to know you're not alone. If you send me an email, I'll send you back something that I struggle with, because there's lots of things I struggle with. I'm not immediately good at everything I do. And so I've got lots of things I could share there.
Good. All right. So does anybody have any questions? We do have a couple minutes before we wrap up here. If you do have any questions, go ahead and just throw them in the chat. And if you don't, then happy holidays. This is our last webcast of the year. We will be starting up next year. I think we're going to change the format around a little bit, but we're still going to be back with more webcasts.
Oh, it feels like it's not. It's crazy to think we're already at the end of the year.
We're at mid-December.
Gosh, it feels like it was just New Year's.
Yeah.
Somebody just asked or said that they got in late. Will they be able to access the recording? Yes,
Yeah.
the recording for this will be posted on YouTube later.
Absolutely.